You know, when I was little, I used to want to live in a house like this. You know, how it used to be. You live with your family?
I got out of there as quick as I could.
You know what works well about this little podcast, this little show that we have?
What's that?
We don't have to be anywhere near each other.
That is true.
In the day of social distancing, we got this locked down.
I saw
something.
I saw someone post something about instead of social distancing, it's social dancing.
So is it like kind of like a rap battle where you're like insulting each other but via dance? Is
Yeah,
that
I
what the
guess
idea
so.
is? Dis dancing.
The only cure for corona.
Dis dancing. I like it. Yeah. No, welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends with myself. My name is David, and that guy's name is Aaron.
My name
Hello,
is Aaron. Your name is David.
It's true. I feel like I need to, in the spirit of, you know, the coronavirus and stuff, I feel like I need to greet you in Spanish. So, hola, Aaron. You know, because Corona being a Mexican beer. Did you see what I did there?
So what do I do for a non-alcoholic beer? President's choice, David.
President's choice. Club soda to you, too.
Actually,
Although-
cherry Pepsi.
Oh, fancy. You know, it's funny because I'm a huge fan of Cherry Coke. Not so much Cherry Pepsi. I like Pepsi, but I just find Cherry Coke to be much better than Cherry Pepsi.
I don't know pop enough to know.
That's fair, but I like the machines that you go to, and you can, because Cherry Coke has forever been like my favorite, and forever here in Canada, it was unavailable, right?
Right.
Like now it's popping up in the odd place. Like I think Burger King typically has it,
Okay.
and then some of the restaurants have like the machines where you can choose the flavors to add
Right.
or whatever. But yeah, for the most part, it's still not really readily available. But I mean, maybe now that the apocalypse is upon us, we can figure out getting that up here. I don't know.
Yeah, well, guess you never know what can happen these days.
There you go. Go and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Growing Punk Pod. You will find both of our personal Twitter and Instagrams linked there as well. I will point out that you are still labeled as a butthead on Twitter, even though your Twitter handle is now there.
Hey, I'm
And-
sticking with my original name.
I get the stupidest grin on my face anytime I see that you've tweeted something. I was like, oh, look, there he is, being active on the old Twitter.
So what I don't know what to do about that is I'm already posting on Facebook and Instagram. Do I just post the same thing? I don't have really any followers on Twitter because I just
Well,
haven't
last-
spent time on it, and so it's I don't know.
I'm curious. I'm going to open up Twitter right now. I want to see what your followers are at this very moment.
6?
That's what I think it was last time I looked, yeah. Let's see. Aaron grew up. 9. Crushing it.
Oh man, that 10th one's gonna get a special prize.
Right? I mean, yeah, you're tweeting videos of you playing drums. You're tweeting talking about records that you love. It's a good time. It's a good follow.
I'll take
go
it.
ahead. Follow. Go find, like I said, go find them on you can find the links on our Twitter and Instagram at Growing Punk Pod. But yeah, we're gonna continue a series that we started last week, and because we've started, we like doing these little. We decided we like doing some kind of series,
Yeah.
something that ties a few episodes together. So if you missed last week's episode, go back and listen to it. It's about Goldfinger, and we discussed their self-titled, their first record, as well as I guess their latest, not counting the Christmas EP they released recently, but their latest record, which is The Knife. We talked about those, and the link to that episode, to this episode, is John Feldman, because these two records we're going to talk about are both produced by John Feldman. And yeah, one of them is one of the first John Feldman records I think I heard and knew that it was him behind. And then, yeah, so we're going to talk about the self-titled first record from The Used, and then we're going to get into Page Avenue by Story of the Year. I don't know how many times over the course of this past week I kept writing Page Avenue, the story so far.
Oh yeah.
Like, no, that's not accurate.
Yeah, easy to confuse. Well, not only are they produced by John Feldman, but he also discovered those bands and helped them get signed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a unique situation.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get into some of that stuff as well. But so first, yeah, let's talk about the self-titled debut record from The Used. I don't know about you, but this record for me, specifically this record, I would say this band, but I didn't really get into much of The Used outside of this record. And then what was their second one, was In Love and Death or whatever. Yeah. I listened to that one a bit when it came out. But this record specifically, and then maybe Memories that followed, which was kind of, I believe it was like a CD that had like demo versions of some songs and some B-sides. And then there was like a DVD that had, I can't remember if it was a full live concert or if it was just like specific songs as well as like a documentary looking into the making of the album and stuff.
Right.
But those two records take me back to the closest thing. On the last episode we talked about on one of Get What I Need, maybe, by Goldfinger. He talks about, like the spray paint on the walls and whatever. Yeah. And I was like, the closest I ever came to like living in a house that was like, I mean, this was nowhere near. I should state this from the get-go. Nowhere near like a punk rock house, but it reminds me of like when I first moved out of my parents' house, and I was living with a group of friends, and I was in the basement. And how it worked is it was like you came down the stairs. It was an undeveloped basement. You came down the stairs, and if you went right, that's like where the basement opened up, right? And like that's where most of the basement was. And if you went left, it was like this small room that was probably best served as like a storage room maybe, or at best a small office. And when I moved out of my parents' house, I moved in there, and I was sleeping on a couch, and I slept on, like, that I brought with me, and I slept on this couch for a couple of years. And it basically went couch, and if you sat on the couch, your knees touched a coffee table, and the coffee table was butted right up to my TV stand with like my TV and my stereo and everything. Yeah. And so it was just like this cramped space. And anytime I listened to like this record, and like I said, maybe Memories, I'm immediately taken back to that space. And there was like one year we had a bunch of people over for New Year's, and for whatever reason, a good chunk of us crammed into my room, and we were just sitting around watching a movie when like the rest of the house was basically empty. I don't understand why or how that happened, but it did. So yeah, whenever I put this record on, though, I'm immediately back in that basement room, sleeping on an old dirty couch.
Hey, party times.
Party times. So what about you? What was your first kind of, I guess, memory or introduction to this record?
So I've got a bit of a backstory. So I grew up in the small town Dauphin. I only had a few friends that I knew of that wasn't into the same kind of music as me. So one night we were biking around town, or we were going for ice cream or something on our bikes, and we hear these Blink-182 songs being played out of a house, like a band was playing them. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, I know all the people that listen to punk in my school. There's like 3 of us. And so we kind of just like hung out outside, just like hoping that they would come outside, and eventually they did. And we started talking to them, and then they were a few years older than us. So I guess that's why I didn't know of them or whatever. And so anyways, they were in this punk band called Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And
nice.
And the band I played in later on, we ended up playing a bunch of shows with them, good dudes. So anyways, we were at their place one day, and they had songs from this album, like, before it came out. I don't know, but I mean, that would have been pretty early on with internet stuff, 2002. Right. So yeah, there would have been downloading whatever. So they had found some of this, and I remember just thinking, like, what is this? Like, this is so crazy. And so that was my first introduction to the Used, that they found them somewhere, so they... before this album was even released, before anyone really even knew them. And
that's awesome. Yeah. I love, like, I don't think we as much live in a time now where, like, that's a way you're going to discover a band, right? Like, walking down the street and you hear some band playing Blink songs, and you're like, wait, who else listens to this band in this small town?
Oh, it was so intriguing.
Especially because now you have such access, right, to music. It's so readily available. But this was also one of the first records for me, along with Full Collapse by Thursday, that kind of not introduced me to screaming, because obviously, like, going back, say, like Nirvana, well, he was screaming on some of those songs, right? But just like
Right.
the whole dynamic of, I guess, like like the post-hardcore emo sort of thing that exploded, you know, at that time. And The Used and Thursday were two bands that kind of did that, like, singing and screaming, and, you know, like, but without being overly, like, heavy.
Right.
Right. So it was kind of one of those, I definitely lump it together with, and I mean, that was kind of that emerging scene at the time, you know, and Taking Back Sunday and whatever stuff like that. Taking Back Sunday didn't scream as much, I don't feel, like maybe a little bit, but it wasn't like something you kind of immediately connected with them. But yeah, so this record definitely holds a place there. And it is also, I mean, it's one of my all-time favorite records. I won't, you know, gloss over that by any means, because it's a record that, since it came out, and I think because it was sort of unique in what it was doing at the time and done really well, it always stuck with me. Like, The Used are a band that I didn't necessarily follow. You know, like, this record came out, maybe Memories I owned and watched the crap out of that DVD, and then when Love and Death came out or whatever, it was kind of like, okay, and then I just sort of fizzled out. And then a few years ago, I can't remember the name of the record, but a few years ago they released an album and they toured with Taking Back Sunday.
Yeah.
And so I went to that show, and
cool.
I got to know both of their new records at the time. I was actually, you know what, they're pretty good. They're I mean, obviously it doesn't have that same, like, Discovery sort of feel to it, but yeah, they definitely, I think they kept it up. They kind of got weird a little bit, maybe for a little bit there, that sort of lost me, but
definitely.
Anyway, yeah, we're going to talk about a few songs, as we always do. And so I picked the songs off this record. You picked the 3 songs off of Story of the Year that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So let's get into the first one, which is The Taste of Ink. I don't know about you, but from the very first count of this song, like, when that guitar hits with the little, like, shots or whatever it's doing,
Right.
and, you know, Bert singing, it was "Worth the Canyon," like, immediately from the first time I heard it until, like, this day when I hear it, I can't help but, like, just get pumped up and sing along. Like, this song makes it onto every, like, mix CD playlist sort of thing if I have a road trip coming up and I want to mix of something. Like, this song, and a lot of times this song starts the playlist for me, because just the way it kind of has, you know, basically just like the guitar and vocals, and then it kicks off. And it's also such, like, a hopeful song, I think. Like, there are a lot of bands in the scene at this time that were probably writing music, like, lyrically that was a little heavier. Maybe when I say darker, I don't necessarily mean, like, oh, they're writing, you know, like, super dark, like, evil sort of,
Right,
like, but just, like, you know, more serious, I think, like, content.
Yeah.
Whereas this song is, like, not that it's not serious, but, like, super hopeful instead of being a downer. And, you know, I just, like, I don't know. It's also got one of the most iconic F-bombs in the genre.
Right.
And every time it comes on, like, it's just designed, I feel like, and written for the crowd to immediately engage and just, like, you know, drop an F-bomb at the top of their lungs. It's so perfectly executed.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of albums that come out now don't have these iconic kind of songs on them, or maybe they do, and we just have access to so much, or things are just so different now. But I do love that about songs like this, albums like this, that, you know, maybe they don't mean the same amount to me now, but as I listen to it, you know, it takes me back to a time that, you know, things were just so much different, and not better in as in, like, I don't like my life now, but, you know, just different, right? You know, you kind of associate music with just being youthful and irresponsible and all that kind of stuff. So this album, to be like, even as I was watching the music videos for it, and I don't know, I just, as I'm watching it, it's like, man, I just feel like just irresponsible the word comes to me. I don't know if it's just the kind of grungy nature that they had and whatever, but
yeah, I mean,
I don't mean
it
that
definitely
in a negative way, but just
no. I mean, Bert was definitely one of the greasiest looking dudes, I think, in the scene at the time, for sure. Just like his hair. There was a band a few years ago, I want to say, well, now 8 years ago, probably in 2012, and I wish off the top of my head I can remember what they called. or what they were called, but they had a video for a song, and the guy looked like he was just doing his best, like Bert impersonation, like down to like the greasy hair.
Yeah, there's probably
what were
lots
they?
of those bands.
I wish I could. I might
Like from
it might
first
get-
to last?
No. Oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. I'm actually trying to open Apple Music right now in hopes that I have it in my collection.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh,
I'm sure there was a lot of lookalikes that were trying to go for that and rip some of that off.
oh, for sure. But he was just like, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, I know who you're trying to be.
So this was the first single off the album, is that correct? I thought it was
No.
Box of Sharp Objects.
Yeah, this wasn't the first single
Oh,
off the
I thought
album.
that's what it said on Wikipedia.
No.
It was the first one released.
Because I think you're right with Box of Sharp Objects. No, or Buried Myself Alive, I think was the first single.
Hmm.
Is that right? The song is about the Used lead singer Bert. Oh no, maybe it wasn't the first single. I saw Taste of Ink was the second single. I wonder if this lists. At least according I'm taking this from genius.com. I just noticed it said it there. Yeah, the second single from the Used self-titled debut album. The video was released in the fall of 2002. I wish I could remember what the first single was. Anyways, but one thing I wanted to say is, you just mentioned before we get back to this, is you like kind of, a lack of sort of iconic songs this day and age. Now this is going back a few years, because like this would go back to 2011, but the first kind of song that popped to mind for me is, as far as being iconic, that maybe came out in like the current sort of punk scene, would actually be Came Out Swinging by the Wonder Years. Off of Suburbia. I've given you all and now I'm nothing. But like the outro on that, or bridge, or whatever you want to call it, where he says, I came out swinging from a South Philly basement, caked in stale beer and sweat under half-lit fluorescence, and I spent the winter writing songs about getting better, and if I'm being honest, I'm getting there. When that part kicks in, I feel like, I know, like, I've only seen them the one time, but when I saw them, like it was 100% engagement. It kind of comes out of nowhere and is this really powerful moment. But yeah, there's not a ton of like songs that immediately jump to mind that have come out in the past little while that I'm like, yeah, that's like that song is iconic. Whereas the Taste of Ink for sure, 100% is iconic.
Yeah, and again, I think it was just the era. There maybe wasn't as much stuff coming out as there is now, or I don't know what you attribute it to. I mean, there's lots
Yeah.
of great albums and songs coming out and still being written, but it's just I
Yeah.
don't know, one of those ones that's going to stand out, for 10, 20 years.
Well, and I think part of that is like there was a shift in like the pop punk sort of world then, because you also had, I would say, like Cross Out the Eyes by Thursday
Right.
was another song that I think would go down. Cute Without the E by Taking Back
Right, yeah,
Sunday. Right? Like there at that time there were a lot of these songs, but also those bands were all like, especially Taking Back Sunday and Thursday, were kind of like leading a charge in, like this sound that was developing, and the Used were definitely a part of that. I
Yeah.
don't know where they sit in all of that. Like, I think they're definitely, like, if there was a Mount Rushmore of like early 2000s, kind of like that emo sound, they're definitely on there.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Alongside like Thursday, Taking Back Sunday, I guess Dashboard Confessional, and maybe like Brand New. Like that would maybe be my,
Yeah.
I don't know how many presidents are on Mount Rushmore. I'm from Canada.
There's 12.
Yeah, it's giant. But anyways, this song, I just like the kind of like the first verse is sort of just about being frustrated with kind of like where, Bert was kind of at that time. But then I want to say it's directly correlated to the band itself, and saying like finding, kind of finding himself and his hope and his purpose in the band, because then the chorus just like opens up and feels hopeful, like here I am sort of thing, alive at last. I think part of it too, if I recall correctly, maybe is about him kicking a drug addiction, I think.
Yeah,
If memory serves me.
Actually, that might have. I remember seeing that maybe about Sharp Objects. Or
Well,
maybe,
Sharp-
I don't know if
Sharp-
it was about.
I think there's a few. Sharp Objects has something interesting in it too, but I feel like I should have looked this up. I'm just like remembering back to like the Maybe Memories DVD, and I feel like there's something in my brain about the like, well, here I am alive at last sort of thing, just like ready to kind of take on life. And the second verse just about like doing that with someone, no longer being held back. And I feel like whenever they play this song live, maybe not as much now because like their core fan base is all older, but definitely at the time, like just like I feel like there would be a lot of tears shed in the sense of people just being like, I'm so ready to leave this behind, and just like,
Yeah.
you know, it's talking about high school kids or just graduating high school and figuring life out, just like giving up and forgetting all the BS or whatever. But, and also like on the song, I just love how the bridge gets kind of delicate and breaks down, gets nice and soft before kind of coming back into the verse. And
Right.
I don't know, just dynamically, I think it's a great song, super poppy guitars that just hook you right away, and great vocal delivery.
Yeah, it's an interesting second song on the album after that first one just kind of comes in blazing, and
Yeah.
then the second one's like, oh, okay, they've got, a different side to them. It's intriguing. And I mean, the album, is quite diverse, all, the whole thing as a whole. So there is a lot of that back and forth of melody and poppiness, and then kind of, the angst and screamy parts. And so it's, just an interesting way to just shift the album kind of right off the bat.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed in like going through this. I'd be like, oh, what was that like quieter song? And then there'd be like 2 or 3 of them that like really kind of, it's like, oh, wait a minute, right, I forgot about this and this song. And they're like, yeah, they definitely have a bunch of dynamics on this record. And, for as raw as they are, I also think they come off pretty polished in like their sound, and the fact that this is like a first record, I feel like you don't see that too terribly often anymore, right? Like where a band's first record, maybe you do, but it's just like so good. Because this one was, I mean, I guess Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends was really good too. But yeah, it's like for a band's first record in my mind, I'd say this is their best, because usually you kind of have those growing pains before they really hit that stride. But I could be alone in saying that I think it's their best. I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, I've got the same mentality with it. I feel the opposite with Story of the Year. We'll have a few anecdotes back and forth on the two bands in between here, but how The Used I felt was their best album starting out, and that's really when they peaked. And yeah, like you said, I kind of fell off on really following them after that, but nothing I heard really grabbed me the same. Whereas Story of the Year, I felt like their first one was the weakest one, and only everything after that got better. So it's really interesting dynamic. But yeah, definitely a great piece of music right off the bat for them, for sure.
Yeah. Let's get into a second song that we're going to take a closer look at. We mentioned it a minute ago. It's A Box of Sharp Objects. So this song, the one thing I love about it, what do you think this song is about specifically?
Well, I think it was on Wikipedia or something that it was something to do with drug abuse or something that I don't really know how you correlated sharp objects. I guess just maybe about drugs being that, right, where it's harmful to you, but I guess it brings you something that keeps you coming back. And so
right,
I don't know if he's kind of correlating those two things.
So I mean, the song itself may be about drug addiction possibly, but like I know in an interview again on that Maybe Memories DVD, Bert says like, so a box of sharp objects, he's actually talking specifically about music, like sheet music, and a box being like a measure or whatever, and the sharp objects being like the musical notes, like sharp or flat, and just finding, cool. I know that was brought up multiple times, like on that DVD, about how, he was like just kind of finding new life in music basically. Right. And, so that song has always kind of been, or this song has always kind of been special to me in that sense. And we've brought this up with different episodes, different bands, different songs, just about speaking specifically to kind of like the power of music and what it can actually do. And so in this case, he's talking, about playing music and how, it kind of helped, I think, dig him out of a hole sort of thing. Right. And I don't know where he's at these days with, any sort of drug addiction or anything like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like, this just a song about finding clarity and release in music. And I just liked kind of that metaphor because it doesn't necessarily hit you right in the face, right?
Yeah,
and he's like, I found a box of sharp objects. What a beautiful day. Like, well, what does that even mean? Like, reading some of people's deciphering the lyrics, they're like, well, the drug thing, like you mentioned, whether it's like syringes or whatever, or even like razor blades, like for cutting sort of thing. And like, as far as I know, Yeah, but instead it's again like this hopeful message, and I'm like that's pretty cool. I mean, you kind of masked it a little bit, but it's pretty rad.
Yeah, what I didn't pick up on this song until I was reading the lyrics this week is it's essentially the same lyrics the
Yes.
whole song, but because, he sings a verse of it and then screams a verse of it, it breaks up the song enough. I thought that was really unique. When I looked up lyrics, I was like, oh, that's it, and I was listening
That's it,
through, and
yeah.
it's like, so yeah, it was
That-
kind of a cool. It's short, but like you said, if it's that talking about that music, it's like just talk about the impact and just keep it at that.
Well, it's funny because that was my next note. I said the only thing I might criticize this song is that I wish there was even more lyrically kind of here. It gets pretty repetitive because same thing. I was like, it never dawned on me that, oh, it's just like the same, verse and chorus repeated or whatever, right? And yeah, so I was like, oh, I wish there was a little bit more. I mean, the song goes real hard though, like right from the intro into like that guitar riff that he plays. Like that's one thing about this record that maybe doesn't get mentioned enough, because I know, like, if I remember back when this record was out and maybe the next record or whatever, all the talk was about Bert and his vocals, and he's definitely has a distinct vocal sound, right? Like but like I think Quinn, was that his name, Quinn?
Yeah.
Or that's his last name or something. But anyway, his guitar work on this record I think kind of is a little underrated at times. There's some neat stuff that he does on here. And that song I've always gotten into, kind of like that, just how it's like ba-da-da, like straight into that riff.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah, it was
great.
definitely something that stood out to me too, was the guitar playing. And again, it's especially on a song like this, like it comes across as a heavier song, but
Yeah.
the guitar playing, I mean, just the sound of the guitar and the riffs aren't necessarily heavy, but just when you kind of
Yeah.
pair it with the vocals, that's always a cool thing when a band can kind of achieve a sound that isn't maybe as specific to that genre, but it comes off that way just with the dynamics of the vocals and the instruments.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just sort of a sign of the genre at that time, because it's probably fair to say to an extent that bands like The Used and Thursday and whatnot were kind of like precursors to what would be, bands like, at least for fans, maybe getting into bands like Under Oath, and then further going
Right.
down like the heavier side of things,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
because if you think about like Under Oath, with their first few records, they didn't really blow up until they're Only Chasing Safety. And that record was like when they first really dove headfirst into like embracing the poppy singing,
Right.
and, like the screams. And so like with these bands, like I would say The Used was definitely a lot poppier than a band like Thursday. Thursday was more on the like the art side, the arty side, and I
Yeah.
think they were all like art school students as was. So it's it explains itself, but yeah, definitely acting as precursors to like mixing in more of the heavy side of things, and at this point just being more melodic almost, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this song, the guitar work really stands out for me. And like I said, it would have been cool if there was maybe just another verse in there, something to unpack a little further.
Yeah.
But all in all, like it's a song that goes every which way, and it's pretty great. Which is going to lead us, I think, into the final song that we'll discuss off this record before we kind of do some rapid fire song mentions. But On My Own, this one, the first thing I love about this song is, and I've mentioned Bert's vocals, is how it really showcases his vocals. It's so delicate, and he really kind of like, you see the softer side of him, but then what you also see is his ability to sing really freaking high. Like there's the outro of the song or whatever, there's like I'm trying to think if it's even a harmony. No, because I think he just goes up to it, and he like goes up an octave or whatever, and he's singing like the On My Own, and it's really high in the background before he turns it into a scream or whatever. It's just, I think it's a really neat song. It might be, out of the three songs we looked at, it is the saddest song though.
Yeah, definitely. And I almost wish he would have just kept it to singing on this one. I didn't really love, like, in this kind of the orchestra playing in the background. When he starts going into those screams, to me they just sounded a bit too forced in that part, and I wouldn't have minded if he just had kept it to just the singing.
Right.
Because he is showcasing something different there. So when it goes to the scream, it's kind of like, I just kind of threw it in there because he had to, or that's their thing or something. So
Maybe.
know.
I know you had mentioned earlier in the week about how there were some spots where you're like, oh, they didn't quite hold up, and you were talking about the screaming. And so, like, was it specifically this song, or just in general, were there a few other spots where that kind of stood out, where you're like, oh, the scream sound a little forced?
Yeah, there was. I didn't write down the name of the song. There was one other one, for sure, where there was a part, and I think I had a note here, maybe even on Taste of Ink, and I know that was kind of his style, right? He'd be singing, and then maybe at the end of the sentence or the word, he would just kind of like push it to a scream.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, and sometimes again it just kind of felt a little too forced and maybe a little too raw. It was just kind of like, I don't know if
Yeah.
that really adds to the song or just kind of is there.
I mean, there could be other parts. Specifically on this song, I like it. I think it's because maybe if he had gone to the scream without going, like, jumping the octave like that, maybe then I could see where you're coming from. This one, though, I think the idea that I get from it is, I mean, yeah, he showcases how high he can sing, but as you mentioned, especially at this time, I think his style very much was, I know he would like sing and scream until he puked sometimes. Like he would go side stage and just throw up, right? Because he was like pushing so hard, which definitely probably if you're forcing yourself to vomit because you're pushing so hard is not healthy for you or your voice, right? But it was part of this thing with him about how, you know, emotional he was, which was like a very sort of like pinpointed thing, I feel, at that time. Because like looking at another band mentioned earlier, like Dashboard Confessional, he was known for like, obviously he was like mainly an acoustic project, eventually going full band, but he would like be singing these nice songs and all of a sudden just like go over and kind of push himself over and start screaming. And so I think it was like a sound at that time, and it was all about being like, oh, well, those screams are like so emotionally vulnerable sort of thing. And so it was definitely, I think, like a style of the time. But like this song, yeah, I don't know. I love the vocal delivery from start to finish, because there's even a line at the end of the first verse, where he says, "Maybe I know." What does he say? Oh, he says, "Maybe what do I know?" And the way he says it is like he's kind of like just like giving up,
Right?
And he drops an F-bomb in there too, but it's almost like under his breath. He's like, what do I know, right? Like, and just kind of giving up on what he thought, you know, he had known this whole time. And it's just, which is why, like, then realizing he's got to face it all on his own, which is, I think, why, I don't know specifically who that song's about, but it's a pretty heavy, hard song.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an issue with that scream at the end, but I can see kind of where you're coming from. Like, especially on like a softer song that stays soft the whole way through, it would have been, I could see being like, yeah, it'd be kind of nice if he just sort of stayed true to that, but throws the screams in there. But I think it was also to show he's unhinged, he's chaotic.
Yeah, and again, you know, just like I said, certain things maybe didn't hold up the same for me as they did, you
Right.
know, 18 years ago. So
Yeah. So I don't know. We're going to go through, we didn't share these songs, like just kind of the quick hits. But the first one I'll share, and then maybe you can share the next one. And if it's on my list, I'll share my notes too. And we'll just go back and forth for a few songs. If you picked any, did you pick any?
yeah, I've got
Okay.
3 others here.
Oh, so do I. Let's see if we get the same ones. I doubt that all 3 will be the same. But the first one that I kind of mentioned in quick hit was Poetic Tragedy. Did that one make your list?
No.
All right. I just love how this one starts like kind of clean and inviting, but the end of it's one of the ones that starts sort of soft, but the end is just kind of like incredibly raw, which is a thing that they do. And he just kind of almost starts screaming like back and forth with himself. I don't know. It's always been like sort of one of those things going back to On My Own, where it's just like, he sort of hints at these like, just kind of going over sometimes, right? Like pushing himself over the edge. What was one of your quick hits?
I got Blue and Yellow. That's one of my favorites off the album.
Yeah. It didn't make my list, but it almost did.
Yeah.
It's another one that starts soft.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, it's a very dynamic album. I think, you know, on Wikipedia it's got, you know, emo, screamo, post-hardcore, maybe a few others too. So I do like that about this record, that, you know, they can write catchy, iconic songs, but not just sticking within one genre. You know, sometimes they go back and forth a bit too much for my liking, but it does make it an interesting album to listen to.
Sure. Yeah. Next on my list was Buried Myself Alive.
That's mine too.
Yeah, okay. So this one, the thing that always stood out for me is I've never actually learned how to play it on guitar, but I've watched Quinn play it multiple times, and I've always been like, what? I've never seen anyone else do this. But so I don't know if he's barring like on the 12th fret harmonic or if he's purely just barring to kind of mute the strings. But he takes, so he's a normal-handed guitar player, right? And he takes his right hand and he lays it across the strings at the 12th fret, which would create harmonics, which is why I think he probably is doing this. But then he does like hammer-ons and pull-offs on the 5th and 7th fret, which are also locations for harmonics. And it makes this like just interesting guitar sound that I've
really cool.
never like heard, and I've never seen anyone do it since. And so when I mentioned kind of the guitar work earlier, I'm just like, yeah, like this record is just like layered with kind of really neat guitar parts. And like that one has always been kind of like iconic to me. Because yeah, like I as far as I know, I've never seen or heard another band do it, and it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Did they play that song when you saw them live? Do you remember?
I've seen them live 3 times,
Oh, okay.
I think.
Yeah,
Maybe
I wonder
even
how
4
that
times.
would pull off live.
I can't.
That part.
Yeah, I can't remember. Like I've seen them play it on live videos, and it sounds fine. It probably doesn't sound as clean as like on the record.
Right.
But yeah, like it. I mean, yeah, it's the first time I noticed what he was doing was watching him on that live DVD, and I was like, what is happening right now?
Yeah.
Like I don't understand this, because I didn't necessarily pick up on it just listening to the album, right? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a neat thing, but whatever. You could probably accomplish that in different ways, and then to watch him play it, going, what? I've never seen someone do that. Like I've seen 2-hand tapping, but never seen someone who appears to bar a harmonic and then hammer on. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Then my last
was next?
one is Maybe Memories. It's a great
Okay,
opener,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
I love every time that, just that guitar sound or whatever, and then the snare comes in and then just hits full throttle. I love that.
Yeah, no, it is a great song. That's not the final one on my list, but it is for sure another. Yeah, like just the way it starts, like the sound kind of building in. It kind of created its own thing that, I mean, I know it now. The song doesn't have to fully kick in for me to know what song is on, right? Because they kind of got this like fade in of weird sounds and whatever, and I'm like, yep. Here we go. We're about to start the Used album, like, and we're gonna have a good time for the next however long. It's a great opener. My final song was actually Noise and Kisses, which the chorus gets me to sing each and every time. And again, the guitar work in this song really kind of stands out. It's later on the record, and it just kind of almost like comes out of nowhere. Like, oh yeah, we're still going, and there's still really good songs that are happening.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. But that's going to move us into the second record we're going to talk about, which was also a band discovered by John Feldmann and I believe produced by John Feldmann. We're going to talk about Page Avenue by Story of the Year. Yeah, you picked the songs on this one, so why don't you share, not jumping into the songs yet, but your first kind of initial thoughts and memories of this record?
Yeah, I don't. So this album came out this September, a year later. So that Used album came out the year I graduated high school. So again, a very kind of impactful time. And I don't really have a specific memory with this album. I think I actually got this album a number of years later after they had released other albums that had gotten me into them. I do remember hearing it for the first time and just kind of feeling a bit confused as to why it sounded like the Used so much, and just wondering is this the same band or what? Like I wouldn't have known that that John Feldmann produced it, or maybe I would have, but I probably didn't pick up on that, or just the timeline things, right? Because there's not social media and whatever, and so you don't piece all these things together really unless you have the CD. And so I just remember thinking like, this sounds like, production wise it sounds like the Used. The drums sound exactly like the Used album, which I would have picked up on, and just a few kind of things like that I just and it definitely didn't stand out to me as much as an album as the Used one did.
It's funny because it's as if you copied and pasted my initial notes about this record, because specifically, and I'm glad you mentioned it, specifically the drum sound. I was like, when I first heard it, I was like, holy smokes. Like, that sounds like the Used. Obviously, style-wise, they were similar to the Used. Right? But I was like, man, I still kind of do view them as, like, the Used light. You know what I mean? Like they're like the Used, but I didn't find that they were as raw as the Used. And I mean, to be fair, I never really got into anything beyond their first record. Like I may have heard a song here or there, but like Page Avenue, I listened to it and I actually really, really enjoyed it and still do enjoy it. But it always kind of felt like, oh, you're like, you know, the Used's little brother sort of thing, right? And obviously the connection with John Feldmann doesn't help, I don't think, in that. But I will say this, that opening track, again, going back into guitar work, it reminds me of like a polished, like Refused. Were you ever into Refused?
Yeah, yeah.
Like that opening guitar riff that he plays in the song reminds me a lot, actually, of like The Shape of Punk to Come. Or sorry, not specifically the album, but like New Noise, specifically that song,
Right.
just like the guitar riff in this song. But, and again, I mean, there are so many similarities with the Used on this record, but
And I wonder why
will-
John, like, I wonder what his thought process was. Like, was it, okay, I've had success with this band, The Used. Here's another band that's similar enough. Like, just put out more content that is popular, or like,
yeah,
But
I don't know.
with saying that, I do feel like Story of the Year, they do have their own sound enough, and it comes out a lot more in their follow-up records, which I would highly recommend
Right.
checking out. And I think maybe just with a different producer, they got into their sound more. They really kind of came into their own. So it's kind of a weird thing that their first albums for both those bands were so similar. But thankfully, they kind of found their sound after that and kind of branched off.
Yeah, well, and again, I don't know. I mean, maybe if I looked at them, maybe I have listened to some of their other stuff. But yeah, like this record, as far as like Feldmann's idea, it's interesting because like one of the bands we're going to talk about in the future, I think the first band he kind of produced and discovered, Being Messed, actually sounds like, you know, oh, it's another Goldfinger,
Yeah.
right? Like John Feldmann found a band that is clearly inspired by his band, and is like, yeah, I'm going to release you. I'm going to release your music. And so I don't know if it was like just him trying to step in a different direction, and it's like, yeah, he found success with the Used, or what the connection is there. But I mean, they do sound very similar, and I mean the drum sounds tie them together, I find, and maybe the guitar tones a little bit, but obviously vocally they're both unique in their own way. But so let's get into the songs that you picked. Oh, I was going to say that over time though, this record does, like, it stands on its own,
Right.
which maybe even speaks to like the quality of some of the bands that were coming out then. Even when it's like this record feels like a knockoff of this other band, it's actually still really solid. But let's get into the songs. The first one you picked was In the Shadows.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, to John's credit, like both bands ended up, you know, still gaining a lot of success, and you know, both bands are still currently going, and you know, in one capacity or another. So, I mean, he obviously knew what he was doing and could maybe foresee a bit more. Maybe he realized that they're similar now, but maybe he saw something in them where, you know, with him working with them, that they would, you know, eventually go on to do other things. So I just wanted to, because I didn't want it to sound like they kind of came up the same and then stayed the same and were copycats or whatever. But
But yeah, so In the Shadows.
that song musically, you know, it's a mix of. So I love this band because, like the Used, they mix melody and heaviness. However, I like Story of the Year's heaviness. I feel like they're more influenced by heavier bands or like punk and hardcore bands versus the Used. Maybe, I don't know what their influences would be, but you could just tell just from their riffs and, you know, the guitar tone and stuff. And so I love this song because it's a really good mix of that heavy and that melodic. So the song seems to be about a relationship or a challenging circumstance. When things go sour and bleak in a relationship, to be aware to not let it get the best of you, to not let it go too far. I like that line where it says, even in the shadows of our life, we can never let it go this far. So, you know, just when you're kind of in a situation where you're realizing that it's going to a place that you don't want it to go, and just kind of, you know, whether it's with that person in that situation, just saying, you know what, this needs to stop now. And, you know, I've got a few circumstances in my life where when I was listening to this song, it took me back to like, man, like I really didn't like myself in that situation or that circumstance, and I just had to come to grips with it and say, you know what, like, I don't like where this is going, and I don't want it to go any further, and so I just kind of need to make amends with it.
Right. Yeah, I think like this song, first and foremost for me, one thing I loved about it is how, vocally he starts by just like screaming right out of the gate. And it's not like he goes from like screaming cold, hard stop singing. Like he like transitions from screaming
Right.
into singing, but he does it with like, it's almost like a crossfade type thing where it's like he goes from screaming to maybe screaming a little less mixed with singing to singing. Like it's this like neat transition that he does. Next thing you know, like, oh, he's actually singing now. Like what the heck happened here? And like speaking of the lyrics, the line in the second verse, there's a line that says, he's talking about pulling his bottom lip down to his chest
Yeah.
to show how tired his jaw is of waiting to say the things he think that person should
Right.
hear. It's funny because it's like, it's kind of standard fare for the genre though, just to kind of like be like graphic and almost like maybe a little bit violent in your description sort of thing. Like, again, we've talked about Taking Back Sunday where he says, there's like lines where he's like, if you slit my throat with my one last breath, I'd apologize for bleeding on your shirt.
Yeah.
Like, do you, like though, getting kind of violent in their descriptions and whatever. And not that, pulling his lip down is violent, but it's graphic, right? Like I can just picture like someone ripping their lip down. But, and then in like the third verse, he mentions a cramp in his wrist. And I'm not sure if it's from like writing too much, if you've been like with a pen and paper and you've been writing, you kind of get a cramp in your wrist and your hand, or if he's literally talking about, cause like he follows it up by saying with a closed
Yeah.
fist. And I'm like, so are you talking about like actual like physical like fighting, or again is it like a closed fist around a pen sort of thing where he's like just getting it all out, but there's so much of it that he just like keeps writing and he's now physically in pain because of it.
Yeah, to me, I took that as kind of, being closed fist to, again, a relationship or a circumstance, right? Where you're just like, you're always clenching your fist in frustration
Right.
or whatever. And yeah, I love that the bridge in there where they're just kind of yelling with a closed fist.
Yeah.
And just right when you just release that fist, when you're more open-handed to things in life, right? It just kind of releases that stress, and so that's kind of what I took it as.
Yeah, I think it can be taken in the same story either way, really, right? Like whether it's because there's just been so much stress and back and forth going on, whether it's like he's again making like a physical metaphor, or he's got so much that he can't stop getting it out, or he's been walking around, he's just like he's so tense all the time that his fists are always clenched, and he's I like this song lyrically. I mean, again, this record from start to finish, I also enjoy it.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm intrigued because I got into the band like right away. I feel like I probably heard of them because I can't remember the very moment, but like where someone was like, "Oh, you like The Used? Have you ever heard of Story of the Year? They're like this new band. If you like The Used," like I don't know if that's how it came about or what happened, how I heard about them. But like this record, while in some spots it does feel a little more generic to me,
Yeah, for sure.
all in all, I still think like the songwriting on this record is pretty solid.
Yeah. I also wanted to make a point that he says 2:55 a.m. So I just had to compare that to The Used 4 o'clock in the morning, and now he's talking about 2:55 in the morning.
So it's funny that you bring up that comparison because when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute. And I went on to the video for The Taste of Ink because right at the very beginning of the video, a line or two before the 4 o'clock line, he there's a clock that flashes up, but it's actually, and I was like, wait, did it say 2:55? But it says 2:59 in the video.
Close.
There's a clock that, I was like, oh man. So yeah, it is kind of funny. We're just dealing with time here in the middle of the night. I guess this is when these guys thrive,
Yeah.
But let's get us into the next track here, which is one that you almost removed to add another one. And I said, but I want to talk about that one. So it stayed in the list. We're going to talk about Page Avenue.
Yeah, this is one of the standout popular songs on the album, and I just love the nostalgia of this song. We talked about this last week with Goldfinger. Just thinking back on memories of our youth. I'm assuming Page Avenue was like their hangout spot or jam spot or something And so, yeah, similar to Goldfinger, just reminiscing about youth. And even when you know good things are ahead, sometimes you self-sabotage in the present.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I've seen that lots with, whether it's like youth I've worked with or whatever, right? Like, that good things can come, but at the same time, you just kind of want things to stay where they are. And so you kind of sabotage
Right.
things. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason I wanted to talk about this song is because every time I hear this song, I actually hear a different song.
Oh, which
So-
one was that?
I don't know if you'll remember this. You'd have to go back to, I want to say, it's either like 99, 2000, something around there. But the main riff that's in this song reminds me of the song Schism by Tool.
I would not
You'd have
know
to
that.
go. Yeah, you'd have to go back and maybe if you like looked it up, you'd know it. Like it was on like Much Music, and it was. I don't know if it was on radio. I don't remember if that was a thing on radio at that time. But specifically at the end of the song, especially I should say at the end of the song, when the bass comes in and joins the guitar playing that riff, the guitar or the bass tone, the riff itself is like a simplified version, because I mean Tool is known for odd time signatures and just like being all progressive and whatnot, whereas I feel like I didn't actually count when listening to this song. I'm sure this song's in 4/4, maybe at most it's in 6/8. I don't feel like it was in 6/8, but anyway, the riff that he's playing just sounds like a simplified version of the lead riff in Schism by Tool, and every time I hear it, I'd be like, I just want to start singing Schism, except it doesn't fit because, again, different time signatures, which is funny. I say it doesn't fit because like the line that immediately jumps into brain from Schism is, I know the pieces fit. And I just want to sing that and they don't fit and it's frustrating. But
Yeah. No, that is not a
lyrically
band
though,
I would know enough to.
oh man, you should actually, they've got some songs. I'm not a huge Tool fan by any means. I don't know if I've listened to an entire album like ever. But they do have some songs where I hear them. His voice, for one thing, is fantastic. But anyway, let's, I was going to say lyrically this song, I think you're spot on. I read the lyrics and I'm just like, yep, totally taken like to a place. And I'm wondering, cause there's like the line about the 3-story parking lot or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is he talking? Cause the idea I get from that line actually reminds me of, did you ever see the movie 8 Mile?
Just bits and pieces.
With Eminem.
Yeah.
Well, there's like a rap battle scene where I feel like they're actually in like a parking garage.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm like, were they playing shows in like a parking garage? Is that a thing?
I'm
Because
just
in my
assuming
mind,
they're skateboarding or something.
it could be. And then what do you say? The table? Well, because he says the table set the stage. And so I'm like, okay, is the stage supposed to be an actual like stage like you're playing on, or is it like a tabletop, which is like you mentioned, like a skateboard sort of ramp? Like I don't know. There's just these things where I'm like, because the picture I get, and you mentioned like with the jam space, Page Avenue potentially being just where their jam space was or whatever. The picture I get is definitely like that of like the formation of the band, this group of friends that get together and play music, and here we are sort of thing. But I mean, that could be wrong. I'm sure all of this is easily like searchable, I'm sure it's been covered in an interview
Yeah.
with the band somewhere.
Oh,
but
but it's nice to just take our own takes too and
oh, exactly.
see what it means to us.
Yeah, I feel like this was another album that didn't have a whole lot of annotations on genius.com. I don't like these days it feels like every new album comes out and people are like, here's all these, this is what this means. But like these older ones before, like going online to discuss what songs were about was really much of a thing.
Yeah.
They don't exist as much. It's more up to your interpretation. So we'll say, I'm going to say it's about the formation of the band.
Yeah. Me too.
And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But that'll bring us into the final track that you picked. Unless do you have something else you want to say about Page Avenue?
No. Yeah, let's move to Falling.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Hold on. Before we get into the last one, is this song, seeing as it is the title track, why do you think they made it the title track?
Yeah, I don't know. That's
Because I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
And like title tracks obviously don't always have to be, like singles or anything like that. It just it sometimes surprises me when they're not.
right.
Like a single or whatever. But
Yeah, it's kind of an odd
Yeah.
choice. Like it doesn't really add much of the heavier elements of the band, so it doesn't even really necessarily represent the album that well.
Yeah.
But maybe, yeah, that's
Yeah.
all right too.
thought you might have a thought or two on it. But anyway, let's get into the final track that you picked, which is Falling Down.
So this is one that I actually missed the first time I went through until you mentioned
Oh,
it
yes.
to me. And I think it must have just been because it says Falling Down, plus hidden track or something on Spotify.
Right. Yeah.
And so I don't know if I just saw that and all I saw was hidden track, so I just stopped the album, or I don't remember what happened, but I'm glad you mentioned it because it's an awesome song, and I'm not really sure why they left it till the end of the album. I guess you want to end on a high.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that in further albums that they did, experiment more with the heavier side of the band.
Right.
Because I think like their guitar player was really gifted, at writing really catchy, heavy riffs. And I also would have thought that with the Used, like I would have liked to hear, maybe some more heaviness from them, and maybe they do in albums that they did after that, or maybe that just wasn't their thing to necessarily do that. But
I feel like the Used, from what I can remember, kind of like as far as like the heavier side of things, they kind of went down the road of like the chaotic versus like the heavier riffs, right? And like going back to talking about like when Bert would like push himself over vocally from like a sing to a scream and just being like screaming until he throws up, and just kind of like that emotional chaos that kind of happens. I think it's fair to say that the Used kind of went more down, the roots of like their emo roots,
right,
versus like, as you mentioned, and this song is a prime example, but Story of the Year maybe going more down the road of like those hardcore punk roots. And obviously there's a reason we're talking specifically about that in this song, because this song by far is the most straight up punk rock song on the record.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I wish they would have had some more. But like I said, they have albums that come out after that have more of that. And yeah, I feel like lyrically it's similar to In the Shadows. He's talking about holding on to something that's kind of out of his grip, or the struggle of letting go. And that could be, for many different situations. I couldn't really pinpoint a certain thing he was talking about on there. But it kind of seems like a theme on this, right? Of letting go, maybe growing up, or sensing a shift in life and trying to kind of figure things out.
Yeah. And like this song for me, I think like the very first time I heard it, I was surprised at the guest vocalist on it. So it's Toby Morris of H2O.
Yeah.
And just being like, whoa, wait, like we're talking about, because this was still at a time where it felt very weird for like some of those like genres to cross over. Right? Like this was at a time where it's like, okay, yeah, like if Story of the Year had a guest vocal appearance from Bert from the Used, or from Adam from Taking Back Sunday or something, like that would make sense. But for it to be like from a hardcore punk band and then be like, oh yeah, like, but it, obviously this song again being a little more hardcore punk. That's why when you first gave me your list of songs, I was like, what? No Falling Down? And you're like, oh shoot. Yeah, that's a great song. And I was like, yeah, I'm surprised it was. And so your explanation as to why maybe it didn't make the list makes sense, because I honestly too forgot, like didn't realize this was the last song on the record. I knew about this song, and I was always like, as I was listening through it the first time, kind of like in preparation for this, I was like, there's a song with Toby Morris from H2O on here. I'm sure of it. And like he has a line where he goes, H2O, go. And I was like, where is that? And then, yeah, sure enough, it's the last song on the album. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is a weird finisher. Like it does finish with a punch. Then they followed up with like a goofy, like secret track sort of thing.
Right.
Okay, so this is something I kind of always had an annoyance with this record. So did you ever own it physically?
Yeah, and actually I'm just remembering now that I failed to kind of look through the liner notes and see if there was any tidbits in there. I just realized I do have it, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the liner notes and tidbits, but on the cover, it always annoyed me that there was like a parental advisory thing.
Oh, yeah.
And there's not a single swear on this record.
Oh, really?
Except for in that secret track, they kind of like, I guess you could say, get inappropriate. I don't even know if they swear. I can't remember. Or if it's just like they just kind of start talking about a little more inappropriate. And I was like, okay, like why is this on the record? I mean, sure, it's just goofy and whatever, but if that's why it got the parental advisory, like it's just this like weird combination.
Yeah, I never
like,
noticed that.
There's not a single F-bomb on the record unless it's hidden somewhere and I just missed it or something.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's always confused me as to why it was there. It almost felt like it was there just to kind of lend it some kind of credibility, right? Like,
Yeah,
but
I guess maybe that
I
was
don't know.
allowed. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that this song and album, like, it just ends on a heavy note, right? It kind of fades out on
Yeah.
that breakdown at the end, where it's like, is
Yeah.
this going into something? No, it's just fading out, and
Yeah.
it's kind of intriguing.
And like the lyrics in there about where it says walk, fall, stand again so I can walk, fall. Like just basically talking about picking yourself
Right.
back up, right? Like, yeah, you're gonna fail, you're gonna fall, but you know what? Pick yourself up and just keep going. So it's definitely a banger. And I was like, you can't not have this on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks
it
for bringing that
it's
to my attention.
such a good song. So let's get into, we'll do this the same way we did it with The Used. We'll get into kind of the rapid fire discussion of the other songs. Did you pick 3 for this as well?
No, well, the only
Oh.
other one I had was Until the Day I Die, because that was, I
Yeah.
mean, their kind of biggest one. It was the first single,
Yep.
and so I was just intrigued why it was that one. So I was watching the video again, and yeah, I mean, it's a super catchy song. I don't,
Yeah.
it's not my favorite of theirs by any means. Like, it's good, but it's a bit much for me.
Which is fair. I mean, and I think it's fair, like also fair to say, like, you can't talk about this album without talking about that song.
Right.
I mean, I 100% understand why it was the lead single off this record.
Yeah,
it
for
is
sure.
by far the catchiest song. And I think it kind of maybe sums them up a little bit too, like lyrically, and just, again, a similar message, right? Like just about, just living life to the fullest sort of thing. Not necessarily about just like, hey, let's just have fun, but just like embracing life sort of
Right.
thing, right? And I mean, lyrically, it kind of fit, again, the genre at the time. Until the Day I Die. What is it? I'll spill my heart for you,
Yeah,
or whatever
yeah.
it is. Okay. It fits alongside those other bands at that time as well, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely on my list. The next song that was on that was the only one you had as like a quick
Yeah,
hit?
I mean, I like the rest of the song. I was going through and trying. I was like,
Yeah.
there wasn't really any ones that stood out more than the others, outside of those
Yeah.
4.
Yeah. Well, the next one that kind of jumped on for me was "Anthem of Our Dying Day," which is actually
Yeah,
the
that's
next
another-
song after "Till the Day I Die." Which, like, one of the I guess issues or silly things picking out about this album. Why do you have those songs back to back? "Until the Day I Die," followed by "Anthem of Our Dying Day." I'm like, they're just so lyrically the same.
Right.
But I do like, again, it's more of like an anthemic ballad, which we kind of covered with The Used a little bit too, and how they did that.
Yeah.
And I love the line where he says, "Up here the city lights burn like 1,000 miles of fire."
Yeah.
Like,
That's a cool line.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And then finally, the song that I had last to kind of mention quickly was "Divide and Conquer," which is just another example of his vocals going from screaming and that like transition into singing, not just like the scream, stop, sing, but just like, that like
Yeah.
kind of roll over almost. It's kind of neat. But yeah, all in all, like I said earlier, like this record for sure holds up for me over the years. I would be curious to go and listen to some of the other or like later Story of the Year stuff, because like I said, same with The Used, like they all kind of came, like if I look at those bands, like that time of frame, like that. So like Taking Back Sunday, by the time Louder Now came out, which I don't know what year that was, that was kind of like the back end of my interest in Taking Back Sunday, which I think it's a really good record and I think did really well for them. But that was sort of like when I was getting out of them. Thursday, it was only ever really Full Collapsed. The Used, it was only ever really the self-titled record. Story of the Year was only ever really this one, right? Like
Right.
Brand New, it was only ever really Deja Entendu and whatnot. And so there's like, they all came in this season in these couple of years. And then when those couple of years were up, I was like on to other things or whatever. But so yeah, I am curious to go listen to it, especially if you're saying like they kind of dabble a little on the heavier side in the
Yeah.
later Story of the Year stuff.
Yeah, their follow-up in the wake of Determination is by far, I think, their heaviest one. I think my favorite one is the Black Swan. So that's when they left whatever major label they were on and signed to Epitaph. And to me, that's my favorite album of theirs. But yeah, it's their whole discography is fairly diverse and really, really well done.
Yeah. So if you're picking one of these 2 records, you have to get rid of one, and you can only listen to one of them. Which one are you going with?
I think I'm going to go with The Used, just because it was much more influential. I listened to it, a ton when it came out, and just have a lot more memories attached to it than
A
I
lot
do
more
this one.
maybe memories.
Maybe do I have memories of this one? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you. And and like not only that, not only do I have like those maybe memories attached to it and listen to it a bunch, but also as a record, and this time, like listening to it going like, oh yeah, there's still really good songs, and we're this late in the album, and I don't think any of them are really forgettable. Whereas there are a few songs on Story of the Year where I'm like, oh, what song is this again?
Right.
Oh, right. And then so yeah, I would definitely go with, I think, The Used on that one as well, which may be the first time we've agreed, I think.
Yeah.
It
Right
might
on.
be, because we had agreed, as I mentioned in the last episode, on what was it, Set Your Goals, and then I was like, I changed. I was like, no, you
Right.
know what? I haven't gone back to it, but I've gone back to 4 Years Strong. That was not a wise choice. But so this is, I think, the first one where we're in agreement, and I didn't have any doubt going into it. Like I mentioned earlier, it's one of my favorite records of all time.
Yeah.
Like, I just bought it again on CD because I found it in a thrift store, and my copy is scratched up. So I'm like, sweet, got a new copy to put in the van,
Nice.
because it's one of those ones where, like, when my wife's in a good mood, if she just wants to listen, she'll like be like, oh, put The Used on, and then we'll just listen to The Used. And it's so funny because she's one of the people who are like, when it gets to the 4 o'clock in the morning, she just like drops the F-bomb. It's like, yes. She's like fully embraces it. But
Nice.
so yeah, let's real quick, we're a slight change of plans. We'd announced on our last episode that up next we were going to continue with the John Feldman series. We're going to take a break from the John Feldman series for something a little more timely, I suppose you could say. So when we continue with the John Feldman series, we're going to get back to Mest, Wasting Time, and then the latest State Champs record, which I can't remember what
Living
it's called
Proof.
right now. I was going to say, I want to say Living Proof, but that's, yeah, so there you go. So we will get to those. But next week, we're trying to put together an episode that'll be a little different, and it's probably going to be... This was actually, I should find out, this came as a request on Twitter, actually. I will read the conversation that led to this and just show you why you should follow us on Twitter at GrowingPunkPod. So this came from Jordan on Twitter at JoJoFlow25. There you go. He said, David, growing up, thanks for introducing me to Origami Angel. Wow, they're amazing. Growing Punk Pod should do a pod of what albums a person should check out since more people are staying home. Maybe a bunch of new bands to check out. And of their... What? Oh, and are there any good music documentaries? So I don't know if we'll get into the music documentaries necessarily, but that thought from Jordan on Twitter, JoJoFlow25 or whatever, I put it away. But I was like, oh, this is a good idea. So we're going to do an episode where we're all going to share 3 records. I think I'm going to call it something to do with COVID-19 or whatever. We're all going to share 3 records that we think are kind of like underrated in a sense. Not necessarily our all-time favorites, because no one needs to discover Blink-182, or I shouldn't say no one, but like,
Yeah.
but you know, like, or Newfound Glory or No Effects, or like those big bands. We don't need to be talking about and sharing those bands necessarily. So we're going to get into, you know, maybe some records that went under the radar a little bit for whatever case, and hoping to kind of bring in some guests. In fact, I know some have shared some interest. It's just a matter of actually coordinating it and getting it done. So if you check your podcast feed next week and it's like a 15-minute episode, you'll know that none of those guests came through. If not, we hope
they're
to
going to come through. We're going to make it
Oh
happen.
yeah. We hope to share from a number of different people, you know, their favorite, you know, their 3 favorite kind of underrated records or whatever that they think you should discover while you're in self-isolation, while you're in quarantine, if you need to be with, you know, the whole COVID-19 thing. So if we can be topical for an episode, that's what we'll do.
Yeah. Right
So
on.
that's what's hopefully coming up next. And yeah, so before we get out of here, again, go follow us on Twitter and Instagram at GrowingPunkPod. You can find our personal Twitters and Instagrams there as well. And wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe, you rate, you review. Again, as I always say, if you're listening on YouTube, that's great, but go listen to us on your favorite podcast app. Get the full experience with all the music and stuff as well. That'll do it for this episode. So bye-bye.
Bye.
When you record your demo, I'd really love to be there. You're gonna be great. I got a feeling about you.
Let's go, Alex.
See ya.
See ya.